Good morning. My name is Rebecca. I'm excited to be with you this morning. Happy Super Bowl Sunday to those who observe. We are living in a divided household right now. My 9-year-old daughter desperately wants Taylor Swift to win the Super Bowl. She can't name a single Chiefs player, but she knows who she wants to win today. My 6-year-old son just really wants to see her upset, so he's going for the 49ers. Personally, I am team good snacks and good commercials. So if I win, we all win. It is good to be with you this morning, whether you're here or online. Just great to take some time and be together. Last week, Joel kicked off a series titled The Art of Us Building Communities That Last, and this is really so timely. A study came out recently, and it's adding to a growing body of research that we are living in what's called a loneliness epidemic. This study revealed that 1 in 4 people would identify themselves as either fairly or very lonely. That means in a room like this, every 4th person is leaving feeling isolated and disconnected and alone. The study revealed some other surprising things. I had heard for years that the loneliest demographic was typically seniors, and that made a lot of sense. But this study revealed that seniors are actually reporting fairly good levels of connection. The people that are suffering the most are those 18 to 25. There's been a 70% increase in loneliness among young adults over the last few years. Now, there's a lot of things that contribute to this, one of which I think is social media, is this illusion of robust connection. You can be friends with thousands and thousands of people. You can get updates on everybody. Kindergarten friends, you know what's happening in their lives. You can scroll for hours and hours and hours and never run out of things to see. But at the end of those hours, did you actually experience connection? Were you seen? Were you known? Did you experience community? We're the most connected we have ever been and still the most lonely. We turn to things like social media to meet a need that it's just not designed to meet. It'd be like my kids at dinner time. I put a plate in front of them full of nutrient-dense food-ish. They take 2 bites, and they're done. They're full. 10 minutes later, they're starving for a treat. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all for treats. I have been buying myself Valentine's candy for weeks now. They want to fill themselves up with the treats, and it'll fill their stomach, but it won't provide anything that they need to thrive. Social media has a place in our world, but if we turn to it to meet the needs that it can't, we're always going to end up with deficits. This loneliness epidemic has real implications. Our bodies were not designed for this. When we live in isolation, risk of heart disease, stroke, depression, anxiety, real physical ailments, our chances skyrocket because we were not designed for this. God did not design us to live in isolation. It's one thing to know we need authentic community. I think a lot of us would agree with that on some level, but what does that actually mean? What does that actually look like to find it, to create it, to experience it? Some of us had it modeled for us. I remember as a kid going to my mom's Thursday morning Bible studies. Now, if you're picturing some dark, dusty church basement with 25 women, that was not what this was. This was every Thursday morning. My mom and her 2 best friends just got together on their day off. One of them had a boat on the Mississippi River. And on the very best Thursdays, they would load up 6 kids and lunches and swim gear, and we would head out and just spend the day on the water. We would swim and explore and fight and play, and I honestly have no idea what the moms did. I think they were watching us, but this was a while ago, so I wouldn't be surprised if they weren't. And at the time, this was just a really fun way to spend the day, to fall asleep that night still feeling the waves of the water. These memories are burned in my brain, but now as an adult, I appreciate what was actually happening in that time. That my mom was experiencing community. People that knew what was going on in her life, that could support her and encourage her and pray for her. And maybe sometimes actually open the Bible. This became a ritual that I desperately want to recreate for my kids. But what does it look like? How do we know if we've gotten there? Like any good artist knows, things don't just happen. You don't just stare at a canvas long enough and then poof, there's the art. It requires discipline and creativity and energy and time. So if we're waiting for community to happen to us, we're going to be waiting a long time. Today we're going to look at scripture for some ideas on where we start. How do we form authentic community? Where do we find these answers? We're going to look at the book of Colossians. Colossians is a letter written to an early church. You see, after Jesus' death and resurrection, pockets of believers started sprouting up everywhere. But a lot of them had no idea how to actually be the church. You see, Jesus' death and resurrection just totally blew up what was normal. The old way of doing things no longer fit. And here they were coming together trying to navigate, what does it look like to follow Jesus? What does it look like to do this together? And here at this particular church, you had two groups of people coming together from wildly different backgrounds. Now try and get your head around this. Living in a community with two groups of people on opposite ends of the spectrum, with different worldviews and different values, different ideas on what it looks like to live in community together. You had one group that came from a Roman background, that was used to worshiping multiple gods, that had certain customs and traditions and cultures. And then you had the Israelites who worshiped the one true God, but had a list of rules and regulations to follow to be in relationship with the one true God. But Jesus enters the picture and says, you don't need other gods. I am enough. I am it. And to the Israelites, he says, you don't need all of those rules. I have fulfilled the law so you can be in relationship with God. And here they are coming together. Community is messy now, and it was then. It always is. So Paul starts his letter drawing attention to what they have in common, giving thanks for this church and thanks for the grace of God that binds them all together. He identifies that at one point they all were alienated from God, but through Jesus, they have come together. I love what Colossians 2:19 through 22 says. For God was pleased to have his fullness dwell in Jesus, and through him reconcile himself to all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your mind because of your evil behavior, but now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. He was pleased to have the fullness of God dwell in Jesus, pleased to reconcile himself to us, pleased to go to indescribable lengths to defeat death and sin once and for all, to be in relationship with us. And now when he looks at us in Jesus, he sees perfection. I have been a follower of Jesus for a very long time. I've read the book, I know the ending, and this never fails to blow my mind. That God was pleased to reconcile with us. That we are given new life. Free from the trappings of what was, free from the checklists and the things that we have to measure up to. We're offered new life, not because we have to, but because we get to. We get to live out of this relationship with Jesus. So Paul continues and he gets to chapter 3, verse 12. He says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved. Therefore, in light of everything we've just covered, in light of God's grace, in light of new normal, in light of the life we're called to, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved. Don't miss this, because this underpins everything. Our identity in Jesus is what holds all of this together. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, no longer do we strive to be good enough. No longer do we find our worth in money or power or other people's opinions of us. We are offered something better. We are holy. We are chosen. We are dearly loved. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Here come the instructions for community. Here come the advice on how to go about this. I love this imagery. Clothe yourselves in. Put on these characteristics. Wrap yourselves in. In another letter, Paul describes the work of God in our lives through the characteristics of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control, that these are evidence of God's work in our lives. Put these things on. Each one of us this morning got up and made a decision to get dressed. And if no one has said this yet, thank you. The day would have gone so much differently if you had decided otherwise. The thing is, unless you were my toddler, no one was forcing you to get dressed. You made that decision because to come to a place like this, to gather together, to leave the walls of your home requires it. You chose to put on clothing to be here. I've got to be honest. These characteristics that Paul describes, a lot of them don't come naturally to me. Those close to me know that I am pretty impatient. I don't like to drive slow. I don't like to waste time. I don't like to be inefficient. My 1-year-old knows how to say hustle because I say it to the big kids so much. Patience does not come naturally to me. But according to Paul, I can still choose to put that on. Gentleness doesn't come easy to me. I'm a straight shooter. I'm happy to tell you what I think. And if I'm not careful, what's in my head will come out my mouth, and it's not pretty. But I can choose to put on gentleness. I can choose to measure my words and my tone, and I can choose to live out of the work God is doing in my life. We can choose to clothe ourselves in these attributes. Here's the thing. Choosing these becomes a whole lot easier when I am embracing my identity as somebody holy, chosen, and dearly loved. When I know that I am loved as I am, when I'm not trying to be something I'm not, it is so much easier to extend love to others. When I know that the grace of God covers me, it is so much easier to be compassionate and loving and forgiving to other people. When we embrace that identity, it becomes so much easier to live out of the goodness of God. The first step to authentic community is to recognize our status as holy, chosen, and dearly loved, and to choose daily to live out of this love, to choose to embrace the work God is doing in our lives, to pursue more of that, and every day make the choice to put on those characteristics. The second step is to bear with one another. In the Greek, this bear with is a taking up of someone else's burden, shouldering someone's burden. There's cost here. Time, energy, emotional investment. It costs us something to take up the burdens of others. A few weeks ago, my husband took our big kids up to the mountains. And so it was just me and the little guy at home, and I decided to have some friends over. We were going to have brunch. It's been a while since we hung out. I'm trying to create that community, so this was a perfect opportunity to do it. And the morning was going great. The baby slept in. I got so much done. It was beautiful. And then parents of little kids, you know this moment where it crosses into they're sleeping in and then they're sleeping in too long. And that can only mean one thing, that they're getting sick. So he finally gets up and he's doing okay. So I text him, I say, it's up to you. You can risk it. I won't be offended if you stay home. I don't know what's happening. So they come and we're having a great time, and he's doing fine. He really is. We're enjoying brunch, and you all know where this is going already. We're sitting at the table, and he folds in half and completely empties the contents of his stomach all over the kitchen floor. He's covered. I'm covered. I whisk him upstairs to get both of us cleaned up, and all I'm thinking about is the mess that I have just left my friends in downstairs. And that's when I start hearing chairs moving and cabinets opening and cleaners being sprayed and lots of affirmation for him and how the range, it's just incredible. Bearing with one another is cleaning up messes you didn't create. Bearing with one another is sitting in the tension of someone else's grief. Bearing with one another is taking responsibility that's not yours to own. The second way to authentic community is that we need to be willing to see beyond ourselves and to take up the burden of others. Paul continues. So now we've got who we are, who we're becoming, how we conduct ourselves, and he has a few final pieces of advice here. And forgive one another. If any of you has grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all of these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Forgiveness. Paul says if you have a grievance, but it's probably okay if we interpret this as when you have a grievance. You put imperfect people in imperfect situations, in imperfect communities, and conflict is about to happen. It's just a matter of time. For many of you, conflict is like a cuss word. You avoid it at all costs. It's so uncomfortable. But here's the thing, conflict is actually good for relationships. Right. Conflict shows that you have enough invested in the relationship that you're willing to say the thing out loud. You're willing to challenge for something real, something better, something more authentic. It's not conflict that destroys relationships. When that rupture happens, that's not what destroys relationships. What happens is the lack of repair. What do we do when we have these moments of rupture? How do we move to reconciliation? How do we move to a place of healing and understanding and coming back together? Forgiveness has to be a key ingredient to authentic community because we're going to need it. There's one caveat here I want to be loud and clear on. Forgiveness never, ever, ever means staying in an unsafe or abusive situation. Just hear that from the pulpit loud and clear. Forgiveness never means that you have to stay in compromising situations. You can practice forgiveness and never speak to the person that you are forgiven. You can keep yourself safe and still live in this. God cares about you and your safety dearly. So forgiveness, this relinquishing of our right to get even, relinquishing the burden of bitterness and resentment, the freeing of ourselves and the offender, the laying down of these emotions that just knot us up inside, relinquishing the right to get even when someone might rightfully deserve it. In John chapter 8, we see an example of this in the life of Jesus. He's in the temple courts early one morning, and a woman has been brought before him. This woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, I have a lot of questions here. Like, why is she by herself? Last time I checked, it's really hard to commit adultery by yourself. But here she is, alone and vulnerable. And according to the law, the sin of adultery was punishable by death. Death by stoning, which was just, there's no words for how horrific it was. And so by now, a crowd is starting to form, and they're ready to carry out justice. They have their weapons in hand. They are ready to deliver these fatal blows. And the religious leaders go before Jesus, and they say, what are you going to do here? And this is one of my all-time favorite moments in the life of Jesus. In the midst of the angry crowd that is growing by the minute, Jesus stoops down and starts writing in the sand. What does he write? I have no idea. Maybe it's the law. Maybe it's the names of everybody in that crowd that has also sinned against others. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just doodles. But all I see when I read this passage is the necks of people craning to figure out what he's writing. In that moment, Jesus has taken all of that energy and attention of the angry crowd off of the woman and on to himself. He has shouldered her burden. He has shifted all of that attention away from her and on to him. Jesus finally stands up and said, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." Fine, if you've never sinned, if you have never done anything wrong, if you've never broken the law, go ahead and start this. Go ahead, let it fly. But Jesus knew in that moment that there was only one person who fit that description. And so one by one, from oldest to youngest, they started dropping their stones and leaving until it was just Jesus and the woman. I spent so much time this week thinking about that crowd, thinking about what that moment would have been like when you are armed and ready to go. You have your hands full of what's needed to carry out justice here when Jesus turns it back on you. When Jesus points to you in this moment of introspection, that's not what you saw coming. They were so ready, and then in a moment had to be honest that they deserved the same fate. That just as they could have thrown this at someone else, someone could have thrown it at them. If we are to live in community, in authentic community, we must forgive as the Lord forgave us and relinquish our right to get even. The band's going to come back up, and I want to spend some time here because I think if we're honest, a lot of us walk around carrying these stones of unforgiveness. And for some of us, they're little like this. Maybe for you, you've started to accumulate these because it feels like a form of self-protection. That if you hang on to this unforgiveness, if you hang on to this resentment and this bitterness, it's going to protect you from it happening again. Some of you, your arms are just full of huge wounds. And I don't know how they got there. I don't know if it happened in your childhood or in your career or you were betrayed by a friend. I don't know if you're mad at God or if you're mad at life. But I want you to take some time right where you are and close your eyes and hold out your hands. Feel the weight of the stones you carry. Whether it's a pile of little grievances that have added up over the years. Whether it's huge wounds that have changed the entire way you live. Invite God into this space. What would it feel like today to release them? To let them fall right where you are. To embrace your identity as someone chosen, holy, and dearly loved, and to walk in the freedom that that offers. Bring before the Lord whatever you're holding on to. Some of you are in here and you are hanging on to these stones of unforgiveness and you are wielding them against yourself. You spend all day thinking of all the ways that you come up short, of all the ways you have failed, the things you have and haven't done, the things that you can't seem to get right. Would you lay that unforgiveness down? Would you forgive yourself? And embrace your identity as someone chosen, holy, and so dearly loved. Would you recognize that when God looks at you, he sees nothing less than perfection in Jesus? Some of you are in here and you are not ready to let go. There is more there, and you're not ready. Would you invite someone else into that space with you? Would you let someone shoulder that burden with you? Would you let someone walk with you in that journey? Maybe there's some of you in here that have never totally embraced the love of Jesus. We've talked about it a lot today, and maybe you've never had that moment where you invite Jesus in. Would you do that today? Invite God into the chaos and the mess and the confusion of your life. Here's the beautiful thing: you don't have to have it all figured out. None of us do. But through the gift of Jesus, taking on the burden of our sin and our shame and our brokenness, taking it to the cross, defeating death and sin once and for all, we get to be in right relationship with God. Would you invite Jesus in? And would you tell someone about it? Father, I thank you for your incredible grace, for unstoppable love that took you to the cross for us. I thank you that we get to live differently because of it. Would you show us how to live in authentic community? Would you show us how to embrace our identity as holy, chosen, and dearly loved? Would you show us how to shoulder the burdens of others? Would you show us how to forgive? Father, may we leave this place and not pick up those stones of unforgiveness. May we leave them here at your feet, and may you do a healing work in us. Surprise us in new ways, God. Show us how to cultivate authentic community here. We thank you for the gift of your grace and the freedom that we get to walk in because of you. In Jesus' name, amen.